Good evening, everyone. Lively audience, I love it. All right. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Catherine Larson. I'm the Assistant Curator of Ancient and Islamic Glass here at the museum. And it's my pleasure to welcome you this evening to our Behind the Glass lecture by Dr. Abidemi Babalola. Dr. Babalola completed his undergraduate studies in archaeology at the University of Ibadan in Nigeria and his PhD in anthropology at Rice University in Houston, Texas. He is currently a fellow in the Department of Anthropology at Harvard University and previously was the McMillan Stewart Fellow at the W.E.B. Dubois Institute at the Hutchins Center for African and African American Research, also at Harvard. How's that for a title? Since 2010, Dr. Babalola has directed archaeological excavations related to the early glass industry in Ile-Ife, Nigeria. His research is fundamentally changing what we know about glass and glassmaking in sub-Saharan Africa during the 11th to 15th centuries. In 2017, the Corning Museum of Glass awarded him a Rakow grant for glass research in support of his study of the process of making glass from raw materials at the site. Dr. Babalola has lectured and published extensively about his discoveries, and his work has been covered in popular science journals such as Live Science and Archaeology magazine. As I was skimming through his extensive list of lectures, one in particular caught my eye. Indeed, our ancestors were material scientists. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Babalola to the Corning Museum of Glass.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you all for coming, and thank you, Catherine, for that wonderful introduction. And more importantly, I want to thank Corning Museum for inviting me to give this talk, and also for supporting my research on the early glass production in West Africa. So today, I will be talking about my research, basically, how it started in 2010, and what we have been able to uncover, what we know about the production, and what we know about the property of the glass, and also what we know about the object that was being made. In this case, I think pretty much we only have beads. So I'm really excited to be here. So I will try to run through a lot of the slides that I have here because of time, and try to keep to time at the same time. So let's get to the business. And by the way, I should say that Ile-Ife is in the southwestern part of Nigeria, which is the focus of this research. And then Ile-Ife is pretty much popular in terms of historically and archaeologically, and even intellectually, because that is one of the best universities in Nigeria is located in the city of Ile-Ife. So Ile-Ife is pretty much popular, and it has a lot of tourist influx in Nigeria. So it is not really, for me, it is not really uncommon to have this kind of work done in Ile-Ife, considering the archaeological potential of the city, as you will see as I continue in this talk. So let me quickly go back and say that after the invention of first man-made glass and it spread across the whole world, I mean, it took about 1,400 years before the first glass was really, uncovered in archaeological context in sub-Saharan Africa in form of glass beads. And then after that, I mean, we started seeing a lot of glass beads and some of glass fragments, and most of them, if not all of them, were actually linked to the production center in the Eastern Mediterranean, Indian, and the Middle East and other places. And so because of this idea and because of this understanding, so there was this general belief that glass fragments or glass beads from sub-Saharan Africa mostly, came from outside of the continent, and that there was no primary glass production in sub-Saharan Africa. Not because there was, I mean, basically, I think there was no evidence anyway at that time to prove otherwise, that there was a primary glass production. So that is the understanding many people have, including myself, until very recently when I started this project. And by the way, you will see as I continue in the lecture, I'm not the first person that really, discovered the site in Ile-Ife. The site has been there, it's been known for more than 100 years. Unfortunately, this type of work has never been done, at this magnitude. So Ile-Ife is very important in Yoruba. Ile-Ife is very important not only in the Yoruba, not only among the Yoruba people, but also even in the whole of in West African history. Ile-Ife is pretty much important because Ife was one of the early states and empires that really emerged, from between the 11th century to around 16th century AD, after the oldest and the first one, Ghana Empire, collapsed. And despite the fact that Ile-Ife was one of those early city-states, you don't really get to read much about Ile-Ife. Maybe it's, because of its location in the forest zone. And historically, we believe that most activity was actually going on in the Sahel zone, the much drier zone in the upper part of West Africa. And that is where most literature and on the interconnectivity, globalization, movement of people and idea and object actually concentrated. So you can see in the image here how tiny Ile-Ife is compared to other big empires and states. So I'm just giving this background so that you are not caught unaware, just showing all these pictures and, So like I said, over 100 years have gone since the first, so to speak, archaeological work was carried out in Ile-Ife. That was in 1910, and by a German. Okay, I'll get to that pretty much. So based on this, a lot of work that has been done in Ile-Ife, there has been basically three periodization, of the occupation of Ile-Ife based on what we know. Basically, the pre-classical is believed to have been the period before the 11th century, when there was, very limited centralized political system, and the government was kind of organic, so to speak, and there is the classical period from 11th to 15th century, where we have a lot of things, going on, like you see in some of these ancient cities. So there was a centralized political system, intense craft specialization, and you will see, very soon. And there was also public work in form of pavement with pot sheds, pavement of streets and courtyard with pot sheds. You're going to see the picture also pretty soon. And there is also, intensify regional and the long distance trade. So Ife was also part of that. And there is this belief that by the late 15th, early 16th century, the whole thing kind of went down a little bit because of the emergence of new polities further north, which was really blocking the access of Ile-Ife, which was really blocking the access of Ile-Ife to the northern trans-Saharan trade, and the development of another polity, the Benin Empire in this further south, which was, taking charge of the business by the coast. So Ife was kind of, shook up at the center, so it couldn't go to the coast again because of Benin, and it couldn't go to the north because of Oyo Empire. So, and then in the archaeology of Ile-Ife, for this period, these are what you will see, the artworks. When you Google Ile-Ife on the computer, this is what you will see, and that is what almost everybody knows about Ile-Ife. Down right is the pot-shed pavement. It's a pavement like a street paving made out of ceramic. They actually arrange it in different pattern. There's a different kind of pattern that we have. At times they mix the pottery up with quartz stone, to make design and different kinds. That's the one here, as you can see, different. And so we know that all these things were going on. And what struck me, and like many other people, and also archaeologists and art historians about all these artworks, is that they are heavily decorated with beads around the neck, the cap, the wrist, everywhere. I mean, and they are also so naturalistic. They are mostly made of copper alloy material, and there are some that are terracotta. This one is terracotta, and these other ones are copper alloy material. Some of them, which are not here, are actually of life size, life human head size, and then some of them are not, and some of them are kind of really proportionate to maybe half of life size or three-quarter of life size. So this is what we know. And until now, when you read anything up about archaeology of Ile-Ife, this is what you read up. Unfortunately, you don't get to know much about the real archaeology of the city other than all these artworks, because we know they are beautiful. And yeah, so that was one of the challenge I had, and that was one of the, reasons that actually prompted me to do this work. Initially, I thought I was just going to do a detailed documentation of archaeological excavation in Ile-Ife. Just doing that alone, I thought would have been a very great contribution to the archaeology of Ile-Ife, because most people will only focus on one of the materials and not analyze the other. So unfortunately, I fell in love with glass. And of course, I'm still doing the other side, but now I'm focusing on the glass. So that is on the top right is the city wall, the pattern of the city wall, which is also part of the signature of the classical Ife. It was constructed from earth, digging of earth and then dumping it on one side to form, an embankment. And there's usually a ditch on the outside of the huge embankment. So that is how is, the system. The city is located at the center, and there are also other parts of the cities, in the loops around it. So the site that I'm working on, that I'll be talking about today, is called Olokun, or Olokun Grove. That's how it's been referred to in the literature, Olokun Grove. But the locals prefer to call it Olokun. Igbo simply means forest, like the forest of Olokun. So it's located right on the northern part of the city, just right. Actually, there is a contention on the exact location of the site, because in some publication you see it, you see the dot right outside the city wall. In another, you see it on the inside of the city wall. But for this one, I personally took the GPS coordinates and tried to, mash it up, superimpose it on the Google Earth to see, where it will. So that is my own position. Maybe it's not really the historical position. So that is where the Olokun is located. It's in the past, I read in a lot of literature that the site used to be very vast. Leo Frobenius, when he visited in 1910, he recorded, how long he had to walk for days in the swamp, in the forest, in banana forest, to get to the site, because he first heard about the site and the brilliance of the site in Mali in, I think, 1908, and he was really intrigued. He was on a mission to, so to speak, uncover the lost Atlantic, in Africa. So that was how he found his way to Ile-Ife in 1910, and I think he spent a couple of months there. I'm still going to talk a little tiny bit about him, but that is the site. Today, the site is a national monument in Nigeria, because, if I may go back, this particular artwork, well, there's a contention about that, but let me just say this one is refers to as the Olokun head, the head of Olokun, who is purported to be a goddess, a Yoruba goddess. And the head was actually exhumed at the site in 1910 for Leo Frobenius by the local people in that area. So that was how the site, got the name Olokun Grove. And since then, It's been acquired by the Nigerian federal government under the commission of the National Commission for Museum and Monuments, and it's been declared as national monument, so that is why it's fenced today. And unfortunately, it's really reduced to, this is the site. You can see everywhere is highly built over. It's like you doing a city archaeology right in the middle of the city, so to speak. And I've read a lot of literature about the site used to be very, very, expanse. And when you are even walking the site, about 1.5 kilometers, 2 kilometers away, you start seeing glass beads, crucible on the surface, even before you get to this location where my own work is situated. So that is the site. That is the site right there, and the dots are the spot where I dug in 2011, 2012. So as at the time I visited the site in 2011, there was a free plot on the outside of the fenced one. So, and the owner of the property gave me permission to sample the property as well. So that's why I have these dots outside there. So it's not an outlier. So, Ile-Ife and the glass in the early 19th century. What do we know about Ile-Ife and glass in the early 19th century? Like I said, the idea of the excellence of Ile-Ife, the brilliance, has been known for so long, and it's just that the history is kind of slant a little bit towards a particular object or a particular narrative. So in 1832 or thereabouts, Richard Lander, one of the Lander brothers, who visited Old Oyo, Africa in general, he encountered a seller in a market somewhere in Yoruba land, and the person sold something to him that he described to be very glassy, shiny. So he said, I met and purchased a very curious and a single kind of stone in the market. The native informed us that it was dug from the earth in a country called Ife, believed to be Ife today, where, according to their tradition, their parents were created, and from hence all Africa was peopled. That is the tradition, that is the belief of the Yoruba people, that Ile-Ife is the source of the whole world, not only Yoruba people. And he went further to describe the object, that it consists of a variant of little transparent stone, white, green, and every shade of blue, all embedded in a species of clayey earth, resembling rough mosaic work, which, as I continue, you will see maybe the description fit into some of the materials that we, we came across in our excavation. So as at that time, from this narrative, we know that, of course, the local people had an understanding of possibly something, important must have, been around that area at that time. Then in 1910, we also have Leo Frobenius, who, like I said earlier, spent a couple of months in Ile-Ife digging from one forest to another, just paying the local people to exhume as much artwork for him as they could, because he was really after those artwork. Then he described his encounter at this site, Ido local site. Matthias, I think his assistant, picked up a couple of beads, wiped the dust off one of them, glazed. We examined the other one, glazed again. The body of them all was a substance like porcelain clay, similar to cement, but they were all coated with glaze of many colors. Afterwards, we found entire jars and lids belonging to them, glazed both inside and out. That well described the glass crucible, which we later found from the excavation. Of course, you will see the picture. I didn't find the complete jars anyway, but at least complete jars were found in the 60s and 70s. So the pioneering work on the glass chemical classification in West African archaeology was the work by Claire Davidson in 1972. She did an analysis of a lot of glasses, from across West Africa, and she identified 3 classes, which are the 3 classes listed here. So she was not only particular about Ife, because in the dissertation she actually dedicated a different section on different, sites in Africa, Mali, Nigeria. He talked about Ile-Ife, he talked about Dubois, she talked about other places. But for Ife, she is of the opinion that there is no evidence that any of the glass found at Ife were made from raw materials in sub-Saharan West Africa. There is not sufficient reason to hypothesize the existence of a West African center of production from raw material. That was, of course, I wouldn't blame her at the time. She was working based on the material she had and her understanding of the composition and how the composition really worked. So not until 2006, that was when the idea of possible indigenous glass production in southern Nigeria was, started by the work by James Lutton, who is, I think, an affiliate of Cornell Museum, and also Ige and Professor Tilureren. So they wrote this article about early primary glass production in southern Nigeria, and they were able to identify this particular group, with high lime, high alumina, and they also identify some that are of soda lime, composition. But their conclusion was that the high lime, high alumina appears to be kind of unique, and it's not, known anywhere else in Europe, Middle East, Africa, and they believe it was not perhaps imported to Ile-Ife. And they conclude that, that would have represented primary manufacturing in or near Ile-Ife in the 2nd millennium CE. So this was a very groundbreaking article in 2006, which actually opened a lot of people's eyes to the possibility of primary glass production. And then at the same time, the criticism many people, especially archaeologists, have with the article is just on the archaeological context, because the material that were analyzed were collected from the museum. Some were bought in the local market in Nigeria, some were picked up on the surface in Ile-Ife. So we don't really have archaeological context to it. But the analysis and the interpretation was a kind of classic, and there was what I was running with. So for me, the big question was there glassmaking in medieval West Africa when I started my project? And I was trying to pick up, Lutton's and et al. Argument and see if I can create, so to speak, archaeological model that will fit into their hypothesis to see if what they are seeing is really applicable archaeologically. So, I was interested in archaeological context, production process, chronology of the site, as well as spatial organization. That was like a kind of, hard thing for me, because I thought it was going to be super easy, just dig a little place and you find the evidence of, to reconstruct the spatial management at the site, which still turned out to be really, really, hard. So my research on glass making in Ile-Ife, like I said, began in 2010. So when I carried out a pilot excavation at the site, we put in just 1 by 1 meter unit at the site, the fence, site. And we're so excited at the end of the day, just 1 by 1. And it wasn't much, it wasn't deep so much. It was about between 50 and 60 cm deep, 50 and 60. And then we got almost 140 glass beads. It's unbelievable, from 1/4-inch screen, which we believe that a lot of it must have gone through the screen. So that was a kind of energizer for me. to quickly rush back and see, how much we can do. So then immediately after the fieldwork, my advisor pushed me, and I was so excited, enthusiastic to really write a little report on it and quickly publish it in the Nyamakuma, the Journal of Society for Africanist Archaeologists. So at least is a way of, reporting my research at that time. So that was how the whole thing started. And then from there, 2011, 2012, we went back, we put in more units. This time around, we put in 4 1x3 trenches in different locations within the site, and we put in one outside the plot that I showed you the other time. And what I found most interesting, and which was at the same time the most difficult part of the project at the time, was the screening, because we only lasted a day for us to realize that most of the glass beads that we ought to have been recovering were actually going through the, quarter-inch screen. So there was no way we could get fine mesh in the market that can do the job, and then we resorted to using mosquito netting, which took us forever. Yeah, it's like picking the grain of rice from the sand, kind of. So it took a long time, but at least at the end of the day, it paid off, because we recover, a number of materials that has never been recorded ever before at the site and anywhere else. So, of course, the findings, we have beads, the most common type of finds that we have, different colors, beautiful blue, green. I love them all. I look at them at times, I smile, and I feel like I want to cry, So they are really beautiful, and some of them really, got my attention, particularly the clay, the colorless, these, they are like literally transparent, no color added at all. No color added, or the color was it was decolored, kind of. We still don't know yet, but it's really interesting to me to see that this type of, glass or beads were being made, approximately about 1,000 years ago in the forest of West Africa. So we have about almost 13,000 glass beads as at the time we counted. Then we have about approximately 3 kilograms of wasters, production wasters, which consist of different kind of, waste. At the end of the lecture, I'll show a slide that shows how I've been able to reconstruct the production process by studying the debris. So by studying the debris, you are able to fit a particular debris into a particular process. Also, that is really possible, because of some ethnographic videos and works that we have, everywhere, particularly from Asia, from India. So we see how they are making this and the kind of waste they generate. So we also have crucible fragments. These are crucible fragments. In 2012, we recovered more than 800 fragments of these crucibles, different colors, and the colors match up with the colors we have in the beads. So which shows that, of course, there is something really connected. Then this is the crucible, just for you to have a sense of how it looks. That is a complete one. It was excavated by Frank Willett, I think in late 50s, from Ile-Ife. So we don't have the opportunity to come across, something of this nature, but at least this really helps us to have a complete picture of how it looked like, and we're able to, start putting them together. So we have other stuff, the normal ceramic, and then we have this weird-looking, guy, which we kind of hard to say what exactly it is, but it's something which we believe is related to production, because there is evidence of firing. It's not slag. It's not iron slag, because we tested it. There is high iron, concentration in it, which is more like a kind of clay property. Actually, we try to compare the composition with the domestic regular ceramic, and it's kind of match up with regular ceramic. So we are thinking perhaps if our hypothesis is right, maybe part of the furnace, shattered, maybe. So we also have these guys. They are ceramic cylinders, a rod kind of with this huge incrustation on them, which how they fit into glass production process, we still don't know, but you can see the huge incrustation on them, which shows that they were used, in high temperature activity or near high temperature activity. So, yeah, and if you notice in this excavation, there is a kind of hard surface showing up here, and there is something like a pit showing up here. And that was the reason why we put in this second one, just to be able to expose this pit. That was in 2012. And at the end of the day, this is what we got. This is what we got. This is a pretty shallow, and this is deeper, and we couldn't get to the bottom of this in 2012, and we had to leave it and call it a day, and that was the end in 2012. But thanks to Colonial Museum, we were able to go back 2017 to reopen the same unit and continue from where we stopped, because at this point, I was really interested in having a sense of what this pit could mean, because nobody have seen what a furnace looked like in West Africa, in medieval West Africa before, so we don't know what it is. Was it a pit dug by some random guy digging for antiquity, or a pit related to the production, or maybe a storage pit, or a kind of a trash, production trash pit kind of? So we were actually interested in that. So in 2017, we went back to the same site. We were lucky to have the youngsters who were so energetic around our first day at the site, help us to clear the sites, take away all the dirt. And on the bottom left, you can see the beads, so tiny on the floor. On the surface, it's everywhere. If you are really careful and you want to pick, beads, you can just walk around, few meters and, collect a huge collection. So we continue our excavation. We're able to reopen the same unit. I'm sure you recognize this. So we opened the spot back, and it was not a very pleasant season for us last year because the rain was really bad. So we had to go get the giant tent, and many a times we walk a little bit, stay away, go back, stay away. Anyway, we continued that trend until we were able to at least get something meaningful done. So at the end of the day, we end up digging 9 1x2 meters, unit within the fenced area. And we also put a couple outside the fenced area just to test what we have outside the fenced area. And this is what we have, the pit. You remember the pit we found before? We don't know what it is. We still don't know what it is because a lot of people that have worked on the glass production from late Bronze Age, especially Professor Stewart, who has been of tremendous support of my research and career. He has a lot of experience in the late Bronze Age Egypt glass production. I showed to him. Even many people don't really know exactly what this is. Obviously, we cannot discard heat. That is not important. You can see the one here on the southern end, with the channel going this way. And this appears to be kind of conjoined 3 units, this well-rounded and this bigger one. Of course, there is a kind of exfoliation going on. That was why this one seems to be bigger on the surface, than the other. This is pretty shallow, about 45, 50 cm. and this other one is pretty deep, more than 1 meter deep. We got to the bottom of it, and then this bigger one, we still didn't get to the bottom of it, so we left it again. And there's another one, as you can see, coming out from here. So what could this concentration of pits in different pattern doing in this location? And of course, what could that mean in the glass, in early glass production in Ile-Ife is a question that I'll still continue to pursue, I think, for some time. At the moment, I'm just happy to show this picture. Perhaps there might be someone that, had come across something like this before in the audience or somewhere. I don't know when and where the answer is going to come from. So stratigraphy and chronology, at least we're able to do that. Stratigraphically, it was a little bit difficult because the stratigraphy appears not to be very, very, distinctive, because it's hard for us to really, draw the stratigraphy. However, we try our best, and we could see that there was, actually this is from 2012. The one from 17 is still under process. So, however, a couple of radiocarbon dating that we've done, so far we've done about between 7 and 8. We have a cluster of, dates between 11th and 15th century AD. From the site, we have we got a date from the bottom of this pit, the charcoal we pick from the bottom of this pit, and one somewhere close on the surface, and both gives a date of the same time period, 11th to 13th, 14th century AD, which suggests to me that perhaps the pit was rapidly filled up with the same kind of material that was overlaying the hard surface. So another way of testing our idea of the chronology of the production at the site is by comparing the date with other dates from the city, from Ile-Ife. Ayelabo is another site that is proposed to have been another glass production site in Ile-Ife. Have never been there, but there is this publication on the site, so which I believe, is true. So the date from the site is pretty much the same with what we got from Ibo-Lokun, and also the ceramic from Ibo-Lokun fitting with, the ceramic fair, of the classical Ile-Ife, which is about the same time period. So we are pretty much confident that we're dealing with 11th to 15th century AD. Of course, maybe a little bit much earlier. We wait until we have the evidence for that. So quickly, let me now jump to the evidence we have for glass making. Of course, number one method or way to test this, of course, is the chemical composition analysis, which is the main thing. So we have analyzed quite a number of samples of the glass beads, and we've used SCM EDS, we've used LAICPMS to analyze the glass beads, and we found, interestingly, lime alumina cluster again, does the same thing Lutton, Hector said about this, the prevalence of lime alumina. And then interestingly, from this site and from the corpus of samples that we have analyzed so far, there is no single soda lime glass, not single soda lime glass. Everything from this production site is, belong to either of these three, groups. Of course, the high lime alumina is the main one. Then the low lime alumina is another kind of subgroup. This is kind of in between. It could be kind of anomalies because we only have just 3 samples in that cluster. So I plan to do, to analyze more materials, and again, thanks to Connie Museum. So we are expecting a lot of results back, from the analysis. So we'll be able to compare these results. So we have this, and so that is comparing the lime and the alumina, which shows that the high lime alumina is really prevalent at the site. Then another way of checking is like we try to compare, the composition of the glass beads the production debris and the glass on the inside of the crucible to see if the composition will match up. If the composition, of course, matches up, it shows that they all belong to the same production tradition. And that is exactly what you see in this slide. You see the high lime high alumina highlighted here. This is the low lime high alumina. And then this is the isolated three guys like we had it in the other. So this is really interesting. Then another line of evidence is the crucible itself. I've been working on an article on the crucible itself with Professor Tilleran and Susan McIntosh, my advisor, and another person who has also been working on the same thing. So we decided to collaborate to work on this to understand the functionality and the property of this crucible, what made it so special for the glass production. So what you are seeing here is a SCM image of the section of the crucible, and here is the glass on the inside. This is the ceramic, and here are quartz residue in the glass, in the glass on the inside of the crucible, which to us, or to me, shows that some form of raw material were being fed into the crucible, to melt, and some stubborn one, out of the quartz grain, we still, preserve in the glass because there is no reason for this quartz grain to have migrated from the fabric up to, the inside the glass. So we also have this. This is really fascinating because this is a piece of a crucible fragment, and what you have on the inside of it is a semi-finished glass chunk. And when we started this project, we were hoping that our best line of evidence to argue for glass making would be if we can find any evidence of a semi-finished glass, which is the middle stage of a glass making from raw material. So in January of 2017, I was working in the museum of the university in Ile-Ife, so where most of this material picked up within the city are stored. And I found this piece of crucible with this chunk of something that looked to me at that time like semi-finished glass, but at that time, I didn't really have the expertise, so I collected a bit of it, and I took it with me to UCL Qatar when I was, on fellowship with Professor Tilleran, and immediately was able to confirm that this really looks like a semi-finished glass. Then if it is, then there's no argument about it. There was primary glass production going on there, So yeah, that's it. We're still working on that. We did a preliminary analysis of the substance on the inside, but the result is still yet to come out. But we pretty much believe that it may be, one of our best evidence. So what about the colorants? I'll quickly rush through this. So so far so good, we're able to identify, to group the colorant, the different color of the beads into different glass type. The high lime aluminum glass are mostly predominantly blue, green, and the clear colorless one. And for the blue, of course, we found there is high concentration of cobalt, and the cobalt is connected with high concentration of manganese and zinc and nickel, which we believe that they must have come from the cobalt source. So yeah, we know that cobalt was actually used for the blue, and then we also know that iron must have been used to get the green color because there is high iron concentration in the green, which you don't see in the blue and you don't see in the colorless. So the colorless is so interesting to me because I think the Roman colorless glass, basically they were using the colorant, in form of manganese or antimony, to decolor the glass so that it can be very clear. So when you have colorless glass, you expect to find any of these, maybe maybe that was what they used. Of course, I'm not saying they will have used the same technology, from the Roman glass, but at least that was the understanding at the time. So unfortunately, there was none. The manganese was not enough to have been added deliberately, and also the antimony was not also enough to have been added deliberately to decolor it. Then the question of how was it decolored now comes to play. So which to me suggests that there was a lot of technological engagement going on there, a lot of experimentation going on. Maybe, of course, they must have had their way of doing all this. And then another suggestion that comes to mind is perhaps maybe they knew the source for, a very pure sand, to make that particular clear colored, pure sand, with very limited impurities, but that is kind of not really maybe good argument, because we have some that are kind of in between, not so clear. You can see tint of blue or tint of green in them. So we still, trying to figure this out. Then the low lime high alumina group, they are basically red and yellow. They are basically red and yellow, and we know that the red, copper was used for the red coloration, and for the yellow, that's another mystery that we are yet to also figure out here. So for yellow, you expect to find lead and tin. In this case, both not there again, but there is high concentration of iron. And to my understanding, it's like iron is also possible to give that, dirty yellowish color. But how and what other things they need to do is what I don't know yet. So this is a SEM image of a red glass, with a copper preuse, which shows that they will actually, use copper in getting the red color. And you can see the line, which shows incomplete mixing in the process of production. So most of this narrative and argument are published in the Journal of Archaeological Science. We was newly published, I think in January. I could publish it with Dr. Laura Dubois, Susan McIntosh, and Tulu. So where we flesh out all this argument about the production, the raw material, and we're able to figure out that the raw material, the base silica for the raw material must have been pegmatite granite sand, which is readily available within the region. So how were the beads made then? I don't want to go into reading this anyway, but I think that is also Claire Davidson in 1972 that talks about the, how the beads were made. She argues that the beads would not have been locally made because there was no understanding of a glass blowing, in sub-Saharan Africa at that time. That she is of the opinion that the perforation can only be, made in the tube by glass blowing. However, we now have a lot of evidence that shows that there are so many ways you can make, glass tube without necessarily, knowing how to blow. So James Lutton shared this image with me, which shows this three-stage process of, punching a hole in a glass gather and then pulling on the other side in order to create the perforation in it. And so there is a video here also by James Lutton. He shared it with me. It's from glass bead making in Java, in Indonesia, where he observed how, a glass tube, was, being drawn without necessarily blowing it, using the technique in the image I just showed now. So in this case, you see the guy was, gathering existing broken glasses, try to melt them together and make sure that they are, well formed, and then I'm trying to fast forward the video. Anyway, so it's trying to wait. Okay. Yeah, that's exactly where I want to be. So you can see him punching into the glass gather, and then place it back, heat it up, and then get his plier ready. Another interesting thing to me, two things about this process. Number one is seeing how the hollow was created in the glass gather without necessarily blowing one. And another thing is the kind of waste generated in the process are, similar, if not like almost the same thing with what I found at the site. That necessarily does not mean that they were using the same technique, exactly the same way of drawing. But what it shows to me is that no matter how you draw your tube, what you draw it with, you most likely have to, have the same kind of waste in the process. For example, the coiling one, like the one right there, you see that, and like some of this one falling off on the platter. So we have a lot of that from my collection as well, which I showed not quite long ago. So he's going to try again and make sure he makes a well formed tubes. Then you can see actually one guy can do this, just one person doing this in this case. And Peter Francis Jr. Wrote a lot about the same kind of process in Indian, where two workmen actually, pull the tube aside in opposing direction, and they still get the same result, but through another different. Interestingly, either the Indian way or this way, or the way at Ile-Ife, we have this very similar production waste, which point at definitely drawing. So the long and short of the whole thing is like we now know that the glass beads were made, from a glass tube, which was cut down into smaller pieces, and at the end of the day, the smaller pieces was kind of gathered and remelted in a furnace, by adding some kind of a like powder stuff to really lubricate it so that it doesn't glue together. In the first, I will quickly go back there after this image I show. You can see some of the beads. We have some that kind of clock together, like you see 6, 7, at times 3 beads clocked together. So in the process of remelting it, in order to have that smooth edges, you have some that still clocked together. So which actually shows that it actually gone through that particular process of remelting, and they're trying to refine it to make it look really beautiful. So, yeah, over the years, like I said, not many years anyway, but at least having been working with the collection, I've tried to come out with a kind of sketch of what I believe will have been the complete production process of glass making and the glass bead making at the site. So that is what this image is showing you, right from the collection of raw material, which is the quintessential evidence that you don't have anywhere else. From the stage of a collection of raw material to the stage of the glass making, tube drawing, bead making, and the refining of the beads. Each of these stages, like I said, generate its own different and unique debris, and there are different tools, of course, that was used in each of these stages. So unfortunately, we don't have much of the tools other than the crucibles, which we have presently. So I've been able to come out with this kind of a chart, and I hope as I continue the project, I'll be able to do more beyond this to see how, to look at the social angle to the production. What does it mean in terms of, the glassmaker interaction with other people from other craft production, for example, the copper alloy, casters, what is the relationship between them? This notion of knowledge, crossover thing, how does it apply to glass making at the site? So those are the areas that I still hope to continue. So I will perhaps start wrapping up here, or wrap up, not start, I will wrap up here. But I will leave you with a video of, before that, let me say that one thing that I think this project has done is that it has really helped us to rethink what we know about early glass making, globally. This idea that it was this one type of glass that was invented and spread around, is really not, in this case, there is a kind of variation a little bit, and I believe that in Ile-Ife, among other things, people's experience with raw material and the high level of their knowledge and their skills, experimentation with these materials, and perhaps maybe contact with something similar will have influenced, the way this glass was made. So obviously, there is a lot that we still are yet to know. So I hope to continue, in the near future, especially, what type of furnace were used, who was making the crucible, what is the proximity, between the crucible maker and the glass maker. So many interesting questions that, we still have to ask. And I will leave you with this video, which shows our efforts at, community engagement, at the site. We try to interact with the community, and we are fortunate to invite the Oni of Ile-Ife, that is the king of Ile-Ife, to visit us at the site at the time we're closing. So we put up, that is him, arriving the site, and then we put up a kind of a mini site exhibition board to show and tell him what we have been doing in the last couple of years. And he's really, really supportive, and he was, and he's really interested in what we are doing, and he gave us his support, he gave us his blessing, and he declared the site to be sacred, archaeologically sacred, that nobody should, contest the site, with the archaeologists. And then he was really excited, and he's really looking forward to doing more, and how he will be able to help. That is me explaining the photo exhibition to him at the site. And then after that, he also went into the compound to look at the units that we dug, and he was really excited. So, this is one of the program we believe that in the near future we want to continue in terms of the archaeology of Ile-Ife, trying to let the people understand what we do and how they are connected in terms of their history and their tradition. Thank you.
All right, maybe time for one or two questions. And Chris and Grace have microphones, so if you please wait for your question until the microphone gets to you, so we can all hear your wonderful questions. Any questions to start? Oh, Carol's got one. Great.
It was a wonderful way to end your talk with this video, and it prompts me to ask, the people who do live around this site, do they really have any knowledge of the history of the site? I appreciate your efforts here to educate their leader and by extension them to understand their heritage and the history of the land upon which they live. But often there's such a disconnect between the past and the present, and no respect from the present for the past. So this is a really commendable effort at education and kind of creating that sense of cultural heritage. Was the local population very responsive to what you were doing and wanting to help you protect the site and preserve the remains?
Yeah, thank you so much. I think there is a kind of mixed feeling, because like I said, historically, Ile-Ife is very famous for antiquities. So everybody living in the city, is either you are from there or you live there, knows that when you dig in their backyard, you're going to get something. So there is this consciousness of, people coming to dig for antiquity and taking it away, to sell into, antiquity market and stuff like that. So because of that, there is a lot of resistance, on the part of the people, not because they want to protect it, but just because they want to, keep it for their own, economic benefits, So they will rather dig their backyard and get the stuff than you coming from outside, dig their backyard, get the stuff. Especially it's more difficult when you are coming from overseas, and they're like, oh, you're going to the US to sell all these things, So that was the other. However, they are kind of responsive a little bit because I speak their language, even though I'm not from the city, but at least we still speak the same common Yoruba. I speak their language and I understand gestures and how to use gestures to try to kind of get what you want, stay close to them, tell them stories, be patient with them, whatever they do, you don't get angry, So I've been using all those techniques to really, draw them into what I do. So, so in terms of having understanding of the culture and the heritage of the city, they all have it. Everybody in Ife will want to tell you the story about his compound, his family, his lineage. They all have this story, but it's just this idea that they want to protect the antiquity so that it doesn't get to the hand of the looters. And another good thing for us about the site is because the site is already declared national monument, so it's not a personal property. So we're dealing directly with the government. So I had to get a permit from the National Commission for Museum and Monuments before we can dig at the site. So we should, and then we have a government representative from the museum, stayed with us throughout the entire process. So it was really kind of a easy thing.
I read your paper, and I found as a former chemist, I was very interested in some of your arguments there. One of them struck me. You said that you believe that the calcium that was added, the lime that was added to the local minerals came from snail shells.
Yes.
I thought that was very clever. The other one was that you mentioned some of the clear ones were birefringent or opalescent.
Can you say that again, please?
The birefringent, colors, they show colors.
Yeah, some of them are not really completely clear.
Uh-huh.
That's what I said. We have some that are very clear, you can really see through, and we have some that, with a kind of a tint of blue or green in them that is not so clear. Some are kind of clear but kind of dirty, So to me, it shows that a lot of kind of stuff was going on. I said that in order to, put the argument that they were really sourcing for pure quartz source to make that particular one. That was why I said that, because if they were really sourcing for very pure source of silica for those clear ones, so that means we shouldn't have anyone with tint of blue and a tint of green. So which shows that definitely they must have invented or developed a way of making it so clear.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I think I misread your article that I thought you were arguing there was some phase separation in the clear glass to give that colored effect.
No.
Okay, sorry.
No, it's decoration, yeah.
All right, with that, let's thank Abidemi one more time, and thank you for attending tonight.
Thank you.